So my AVM journey and diagnosis started back when my daughter was 18 months old and I weaned her off of breastfeeding. I went to a neurologist for my chronic migraines and severe headaches I was having, and we thought that it could be a possible hormonal imbalance from weaning off of breastfeeding. We did try different medications. None of them really seemed to help me. And then we did a bathroom renovation, my husband and I and my father-in-law, and we found a whole bunch of mold in our bathroom. So once we removed everything, I didn't have any migraines or headaches for about 3 months. So that's what I thought that it was. I was supposed to follow up with my neurologist if my migraines and headaches started back up, and I unfortunately did not, because I was working full time from home and taking care of our daughter and just so much going on in our daily living. I just tend to put my health on the back burner. And unfortunately, that's what I did. So in July, me and my husband, after working a full day, I was sitting down watching TV with him. Our daughter was sleeping, and I stood up. I don't really remember this, but apparently I had a full cup of coffee. I stood up and I bent over, and I just spilled out the whole cup of coffee all over the coffee table, all over our remote. And my husband was like, "Are you okay?" And I just kind of looked at him and I was like, "I don't know what happened. I don't even know why I was bending over. There was nothing else on the coffee table." And I was like, "I'm so sorry. I'm going to clean this up. I don't know what happened." And he told me not to worry about it. Just, "Are you okay?" And I told him, "I'm not sure. I don't know what's going on." I had a really weird dream that my aunt told me I needed to go get my eyes checked out. And she had passed away in her sleep a couple years prior. And I made an eye appointment for me to go and get my eyes checked out. And I had what they thought was a drusen in the back of my retina, which is just a calcium deposit by your retina, which is common. Just keep an eye on it. Unfortunately, I went to another specialist and they told me that they might want to start setting me up to get a head scan to get this checked out, because I was having pseudotumor symptoms in both of my eyes, which is papilledema, a lot of swelling. So he told me if I had a severe migraine to go to the emergency room. And as we were sitting there and I cleaned up everything the next day working, I had to call my boss and tell him I couldn't work. I couldn't focus on anything. I couldn't read the letters and numbers on the screen. Everything seemed to just be floating and moving around. I couldn't concentrate. I couldn't talk at all. So I went and I laid down in bed and I napped almost all day long, which, I mean, anybody who knows me, I don't sleep during the day. I can't. I've tried so many times and I'm unsuccessful at napping during the day. And my husband, he knew something was wrong. If I'm sleeping during the day, there's something really wrong. And I guess he kept coming into the room trying to get me to go to the emergency room. And I don't even remember it. I remember him saying it maybe once, saying maybe we should go. And I don't really remember that. And I'm like, no, it's just a headache. Like, it's no big deal. I'm okay. I'll be fine. And then a little bit later, I tried to get out of bed and I couldn't. I didn't know how to really move my arms or my legs or get even my head up off of the pillow. It felt like 1,000,000 pounds. And I was like, okay, yeah, we need to go. There's something wrong. Went to our local hospital and they did a head scan with contrast and dye, and they did find my AVM. And then they transported me to a larger hospital. And as soon as I got there, immediately they did a spinal tap. I was losing my vision and seeing dots and auras, so they did a spinal tap and they got 30 milliliters of excess spinal fluid off of my brain. So my brain was underneath a lot of pressure, and they said it's a good thing I did that because I could have ended up really damaging my vision. And after they did that, a neurosurgeon came in and he did an angiogram through my groin to do imaging of my AVM in my brain. And then the following day after that, he said that they were going to do an embolization. There are multiple types of embolization. I had the type of embolization where glue was inserted into the veins to try and kill off that cluster of blood vessels. So I was awake during that process. They also told my husband over the phone, which I didn't know about at the time, was that they knew a lot about the brain. And they knew what was going on in this section of my head, but they didn't know exactly what was going to happen when they inserted the glue. So they needed to keep me awake and orientated, which they do a lot during embolizations. It's very, very common to be awake during the embolization. So they wanted to really keep me awake and alert to make sure that they knew everything that was going on as it was going on. I had the embolization done, and then the next day they sent me home after observation. And a couple days later, I started to have horrible pain. I couldn't even lift my head off of the pillow. I was crying. I couldn't even eat. It hurt to chew so bad. So I called both my physician and my neurosurgeon that did the angiogram and embolization and asked them what I should do. They both recommended that I get right back to the emergency room. So I went right back out to the bigger hospital, and they discovered that I was leaking spinal fluid internally and I needed a blood patch, which is when they take blood from your arm and put it into your spinal canal in your back to create a scab along the spinal column to stop the spinal fluid from leaking. And that was very traumatic. I was told not to move for an hour, to lay flat completely for an hour. And I don't think I moved at all an inch off of the bed for about 3 hours. I just wanted to make sure that it would take, that scab would happen and I wouldn't have to come back. So I ended up getting discharged from the hospital the next day. I had to do a follow-up with my neurosurgeon. And what we knew at the time, or we thought at the time, was that I was going to have multiple rounds of embolizations. They just didn't know how many rounds. So I was hoping that we would be told how many rounds of embolizations I would need to go through and how often I would have to go through them to hopefully get rid of this AVM in my head. I was at very high risk for stroke or aneurysm. So no stress, nothing, no lifting more than a gallon of milk. I couldn't even pick up my daughter. It was really, really tough. When we went there, he told us he talked to a team of neurosurgeons and I would only have a 3% success rate with embolizations. And there's 3 treatments that you can go for with AVMs. One is radiation with a craniotomy. He said that mine is not large enough to go for the radiation and then have the craniotomy. And then he said the embolizations, which I would only have a 3% success rate at, or just craniotomy. And he felt confident with doing the craniotomy. So I said, okay, let's do it. Let's schedule it. We scheduled it for October. This was in August. And he wanted me to go see a neuro-ophthalmologist in the meantime, a special eye doctor, to make sure that the AVM wasn't connected to my eye because of how close it was. And if so, then he would know the right course of action while doing the craniotomy and removing the AVM. I was very lucky that the AVM was not connected to my eye. It was just very close to it. I was put on a diuretic to keep down the pressure on my brain so that my brain wasn't underneath so much pressure all the time and to get rid of the excess fluid. And the diuretic was not a fun experience. It really sucked. Sodas tasted like battery acid. The only soda I could drink was mug root beer. That's it. That's the only kind of soda that I could have. Anything else tasted horrible. And then the pins and needles and tingling feeling in your hands and feet, they just never went away. And for like the first 2 weeks, my whole face was vibrating from taking this diuretic. It would drive me nuts, but I would take it over the pressure that was on my head. And I wasn't losing my vision on the diuretic either, which was awesome. We waited until October, and then we had a strike happening at the hospital. And my surgery got postponed because there was no beds available. So it got postponed till November. And then in November, me, my husband, and my daughter, we all caught COVID. Even though we kept ourselves social distance and kept ourselves in the house, we still all ended up getting COVID. So then my surgery had to be postponed again till December. And with the surgery happening, I had to stay away from people. I had a social distance. I couldn't get sick whatsoever, or else the surgery would have to be postponed again. So in December, we were going to have the craniotomy, and then there was no beds available. And every time I got the phone call, I would just bawl my eyes out that it got canceled again. I was terrified of going to sleep at night, not thinking I was going to wake up in the morning with how bad the head pain was. And there was nothing I could do. I was on so many restrictions. I couldn't do anything. And even if I could, my eyes were so bad, even on the diuretic, that texting people hurt. Watching TV was just, it couldn't happen. I couldn't focus on anything on the screen. Everything was so blurry. And then just watching my daughter in the living room run around, I couldn't even keep my eyes focused on her from one point of the living room to the next point of the living room. I couldn't be left alone with her in case I had a stroke or something like that was happening. My husband and family members had to know the signs and symptoms to look for in case I had one while we were waiting on the craniotomy. And then when it was going to happen in December, of course, we got the phone call. It was canceled, but they had an opening for December 22nd for me to come in. They were going to do the embolization, try and do as much embolization as possible of the AVM to reduce my risk of hemorrhaging and bleeding during the craniotomy. And then on the 23rd, have the craniotomy to remove the AVM. So I did get the bed. I did get in there on the 22nd, and then the 23rd having the craniotomy of 2021. I don't really remember too much of it. I just remember there being a lot of pain. I remember hurting a lot, having a lot of swelling. My face was very, very swollen after the craniotomy. My eyes were very swollen. They were bruised and all yellow. They told me that I looked amazing compared to a lot of craniotomy cases. And I was very grateful that they were able to get all of the AVM. They did do an angiogram right after the craniotomy while I was still under, and they said that they were successful at getting it. They did have to remove some brain matter with the AVM during the craniotomy. I did have to have physical therapy and a at-home nurse come in for a month after I was sent home throughout January. And again, family members, they weren't really allowed to come over. We didn't have anybody come over just so I wouldn't have any risk of infection. And it was a really rough time. It was really rough. I don't know what I would do without my mother and without my mother-in-law. They were absolutely amazing. They were over the top with support and helping out. And my husband was just absolutely amazing with support. He was there with me every day at the hospital. He would wait till one of the nanograms, as we called them, would come over, and then he would go right up to the hospital and he would stay until visiting hours end, and then he'd get right home to be with our daughter and help her get ready for bed and take care of her. And then when I got home from the hospital, they were all at the house and all helping, and my husband was just really, really supportive. I was so bruised up from the angiogram in my wrist, and when I had the angiogram in my groin, I was so bruised up and I was in so much pain with my head. I felt like an airhead. I felt like a caveman. I couldn't move my eyebrows. My forehead was swollen. It was really, really something else. But I was very lucky for my neurosurgeon. He only cut a strip of hair, and my scar goes from one side all the way to the other side. And I did have a drain tube in, and I could feel a little spot somewhere in the back of my head where I had the drain tube. I do have 3 titanium plates and 6 screws in my head. So I can't say I have a screw loose. I have 1 to 6 screws loose. And my hair is growing in pretty well. It's just brain surgery hair, and I don't care. I'm just happy to be alive and to be here. And I do follow up with all my doctors to make sure everything's okay. And I was supposed to have another scan last month in December to make sure that there was no regrowth of the AVM, but because I am pregnant, they said that the angiogram that they did after the craniotomy looks so well. I can give them a call a couple weeks after the baby's born and schedule a head scan just to make sure everything's okay and that there's no regrowth.